In today's video, I'll be doing a walkthrough of the reading section from SAT Practice Test 8. I've scored 1590 on the SAT, and as I go through this practice test, I'm going to show you some of the tips, tricks, and strategies that I use to score highly on the SAT reading section. So with all that being said, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's go ahead and get started. Questions 1 through 10 are based on the following passage. This passage is adopted from Carlos Ruiz Zafón, The Angels Game, copyright 2008 by Dragonworks SL, translation, copyright 2009 by Lucia Graves. The narrator, a writer, recalls his childhood in early 20th century Barcelona. Even then, my only friends were made of paper and ink. At school, I learned to read and write long before the other children. Where my school friends saw notches of ink on incomprehensible pages, I saw light, streets, and people. Words and the mystery of their hidden signs fascinated me, and I saw in them a key with which I could unlock a boundless world, a safe haven from that home, those streets, and those troubled days in which even I could sense that only a limited fortune awaited me. My father didn't like to see books in the house. There was something about them, apart from the letters he could not decipher, that offended him. He used to tell me that as soon as I was 10, he would send me off to work and that I'd better get rid of all my scatterbrained ideas if I didn't want to end up a loser, a nobody. I used to hide my books under the mattress and wait for him to go out or fall asleep so that I could read. Once he caught me reading at night and flew into a rage. He tore the book from my hands and flung it out the window. If I catch you wasting electricity again, reading all this nonsense, you'll be sorry. My father was not a miser, and despite the hardships we suffered, whenever he could, he gave me a few coins so that I could buy myself some treats like the other children. He was convinced that I spent them on licorice sticks, sunflower seeds, or sweets, but I would keep them in a coffee tin under the bed, and when I'd collected 4 or 5 reals, I'd secretly rush out to buy myself a book. My favorite place in the whole city was the Sempier & Sons bookshop on Cala Santa Ana. It smelled of old paper and dust, and it was my sanctuary, my refuge. The bookseller would let me sit on a chair in a corner and read any book I liked to my heart's content. He hardly ever allowed me to pay for the books he placed in my hands, but when he wasn't looking, I'd leave the coins I'd managed to collect on the counter before I left. It was only small change. If I'd had to buy a book with that pittance, I probably have only been able to afford a booklet of cigarette papers. When it was time for me to leave, I would do so dragging my feet. It weighed on my soul. If it had been up to me, I would have stayed there forever. One Christmas, Sempier gave me the best gift I have ever received. It was an old volume, read and experienced to the full. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, I read on the cover. I was aware that Sempier knew a few authors who frequented his establishment, and judging by the care with which he handled the volume, I thought perhaps this Mr. Dickens was one of them. A friend of yours? A lifelong friend, and from now on he's your friend too. That afternoon, I took my new friend home, hidden under the clothes so that my father wouldn't see. It was a rainy winter, with days as gray as lead, and I read Great Expectations about 9 times, partly because I had no other book at hand, partly because I did not think there could be a better one in the whole world, and I was just beginning to suspect that Mr. Dickens had written it just for me. Soon I was convinced that I didn't want to do anything else in this life but learn to do what Mr. Dickens had done. So now that I've read through the passage, I'm going to go ahead and go through the questions. So we have over the course of the passage, the main focus shifts from what? Well, we know in the beginning we're really talking about the narrator's love for reading, and then after that we sort of shift into this transition where we have a focus on the book Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, which ultimately prompts the narrator to then want to become a writer. Okay, so we need to focus in on that sort of transition and shift there. So we have option A general discussion of the narrator's love of reading to a portrayal of an influential incident. Yes, that's perfect. Okay, as I said, we start out discussing the narrator's love of reading in sort of that first, 40-ish lines, and then after, more like 30-ish, and then after that we sort of shift into that influential incident that makes him want to become a writer. Okay, now if you look at question 2, we have the main purpose of lines 1 through 10, even awaited to meet, is to do what? Well, let's go ahead and go to lines 1 through 10. Okay, I'll go ahead and highlight them so it's easy to see. Right, we see that ultimately this is our discussion of how the narrator really loves reading. Okay, it talks about how while his friends were playing, eating candy, he ultimately really focused in on reading because he thought that it unlocked a boundless world. So obviously we see that it's showing the narrator's love for reading. Okay, so we need to find an answer choice that talks about that. We have option A, introduce the characters who play a part in the story. No, we're not really introducing characters there. B, list the difficult conditions the narrator endured in childhood. Also not our focus there, or not the purpose of including those lines. C, describe the passion that drives the actions the narrator recounts. Yes, right, that passion for reading. Ultimately, lines 1 through 10 is showing his passion for reading, which then drives his actions of reading despite his dad not wanting him to, and then him ultimately going to the bookstore, getting that book written by Dickens, and then wanting to become a writer. Okay, so we see our answer there's got to be C. All right, if we look at question number 3 now. So we have, with which of the following statements about his father would the narrator most likely agree? In this case, we just have to go A through D till we find the correct answer. We have option A, he lacked affection for the narrator. No, in fact, the narrator really goes out of his way to state that his father actually loved him. He just, was kind of an old school person and disagreed with reading. And then B, he disliked any unnecessary use of money. Also not true, right? His father gave him money for candy. C, he would not have approved of Sempier's gift. Yes. Why? Well, we know that his father hated his son reading, right? That he hated the narrator reading. We know that he even threw a book out the window. So obviously he would not approve of some peer giving his son a book. Okay, and then D, he objected to the writings of Charles Dickens. Nowhere does it say that. All right, number 4, we have to provide evidence here. Well, if we think about our evidence, right, we could have where he's throwing the book out the window. Another spot that we could have is when the narrator ultimately takes that book home, but then he hides it from his father. So those would be kind of the 2 areas I'd be looking. So if we look at our options A through D here, we have option A of lines 24 to 27. We can take a quick look there because that could be in the range where his father's throwing the book out. We see that it's not though, okay, in 24 to 26/27. We don't see any indication of that being the part where his father's throwing the book, so A is going to be wrong. B, 35 to 37 and then 37 to 38. I don't believe that that's where his father's throwing the book out either, and we see ultimately there we're really focused in on the bookseller. Okay, I'll highlight this in green, right? We see we're focused on the bookseller, okay, so nothing dealing with the father there. So then ultimately we're left with answer choice D, which should then be, since it's toward the end, where he's hiding that book from his father. So 59 to 61, I'll go ahead and highlight that in green. We see he hid the book under his clothes so that his father wouldn't see it. That's perfect. Okay, it's showing that his father would have disapproved of the gift. So our answer there would be D. All right, moving on to number 5. It can reasonably be inferred from the passage that the main reason that the narrator considers Great Expectations to be the best gift he ever received is because what? Okay, this one right here is pretty clear when we take into account the closing line, right? We know that he ultimately wants to become a writer, okay? He said, as soon I was convinced I didn't want to do anything else in life but learn to do what Mr. Dickens has done, or in other words, write great books. Okay, so that's ultimately why Dickens was influential and why the book was influential. Because we need an answer choice that talks about that. We have option A, reading the book convinced him he wanted to be a writer. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, if we look at B through D, I'll show why those are wrong as well. B says he'd only ever been given sweets and snacks as gifts in the past. There's nowhere does it indicate that those are the only gifts he's ever received, so B is incorrect. C, the gift meant that St. Pierre held him in high regard. That's not really, and let me just go ahead and highlight this, okay? We need to pay attention to the wording in the question, right? The main reason, okay? What's the main reason that the reader considers Great Expectations the best gift he ever received? The main reason is that it made him want to become a writer. So we need to make sure that we're paying close attention there, okay? So even though, him receiving the gift may have meant St. Pierre held him in high regard, that's not the main reason that the narrator considers it the best gift he ever received. Okay, and then D, St. Pierre was a friend of the book's author. Okay, that's also not the main reason the narrator considers it the best gift he ever got. Okay, and then for evidence, well, that's going to be where we talk about him wanting to become a writer. So that's going to be this last line here, which it looks like is going to be 68. So I need a line including 68 here, and I see that that's going to be answer choice D. So D will be my answer for 6. All right, moving on to number 7. The narrator indicates that he pays St. Pierre what? Okay, in this case, we kind of got to go A through D. We know he isn't paying them, as much as the books are worth. We have option A, less than St. Pierre expects him to pay for the books. We know St. Pierre doesn't even expect him to pay anything for the books. Okay, so we know A would be wrong because of that. St. Pierre doesn't expect him to pay anything. Okay, so A is going to be incorrect. Next, if we look at B, that he pays St. Pierre nothing. Okay, that's not true. We know that he leaves some quarters or some coins on the table. C, the money he makes selling sweets to the other children. Nowhere does it indicate he sells sweets to other children, so C is wrong. And then ultimately we're left with D as our correct answer. He pays him much less for the books than they are worth, right? He leaves those few coins on the table. As used in line 44, wait most nearly means what? Well, let's go to line 44. Okay, I'll highlight the word so you can see it clearly. And I'll go ahead and erase some of this so it's easier to see what I'm referring to. Okay, so it was line 44 and the word was wait. So we have it right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and read through this. We have, when it was time to leave, I would do so dragging my feet, a weight on my soul. Okay, in this case, when we talk about a weight on his soul, right, we're referring to him not wanting to leave, right? It's kind of a burden. It's a, this sort of weight on his soul. There's really no other way to describe it than a burden. So I'd imagine that that's going to be an answer choice here. If we scroll down, we see that we do have a burden. Okay, we wouldn't describe it as a bulk, right? The reason why, if it's a bulk on his soul, right, that doesn't make sense. Okay, a weight on his soul in this case is just indicating that, it's kind of hurting him, it's harming his progression, it's slowing him down, it's holding him back. A bulk doesn't describe that, right? A burden is something that holds you back. A weight on your soul is something that holds you back. Okay, a bulk does not hold you back. Neither does, a force, right? We would describe a burden as something holding him back, something he has to carry. Okay, so we want to focus on that. And clout's way off. Okay, answer choice D is not even close. All right, number 9. The word friend is used twice in lines 57 to 58 to do what? Okay, anytime you're directed to lines on the SAT, it's always good to go back to them. Okay, so we're looking for the 2 times that we use the word friend. We see one's here, another one's here. Okay, so in this case, we're really describing, St. Pierre talking to the narrator saying that Charles Dickens was a friend of his. So when we say friend here, we're describing, the relationship between Dickens and St. Pierre, right? But in this case, obviously, St. Pierre does not know Dickens. He's referring to him as a friend because he's really read the books. Okay, there's no indication that they actually know each other in person. Really, the insinuation here is that he just knows him through his books. Okay, so we have option A, underline the importance of the narrator's connection to Saint-Pierre. No, we want to focus on that aspect of Dickens here. B, stress how friendships help the narrator deal with his difficult situation at home. That's pretty off topic, or, obviously it's, on topic since it's like, talking about the passage a little bit, but it's very off from what we're talking about in these lines. So it's pretty much not even close. And then C, emphasize the emotional connection Saint-Pierre feels to reading. Potentially that could be. So we'll go ahead and read through D a minute. Okay, it's possible, so we won't get rid of it yet. D, imply that the narrator's sentiments caused him to make an irrational decision. No. Okay, this isn't focused on the narrator, right? Lines 57 to 58, they're focused on showing how Saint-Pierre feels close to Dickens despite never actually meeting him, and he feels close because of the reading, okay, because he's read Dickens' books. So C is perfect for number 9. Number 10, which statement best characterizes the relationship between Saint-Pierre and Charles Dickens? Okay, once again, I kind of already described this relationship, so let's just go ahead and read through our answers. We have option A, Saint-Pierre models his own writing after Dickens' style. We don't even know if Saint-Pierre writes or not, so A is wrong. B, Saint-Pierre is an avid admirer of Dickens' work. Yes, okay, we know that Saint-Pierre calls him his friend. Obviously, he must have read Dickens' books then, and he must like them in order to consider Dickens a friend. And then if we look at C and D, I'll show why those are wrong as well. C says Saint-Pierre feels a personal connection to details of Dickens' biography. We don't know that Great Expectations is a biography. We also don't know that Saint-Pierre feels personal connection to it, even if it was a biography. So C requires far too many assumptions. Okay, so C will be incorrect. And then D, Saint-Pierre considers himself to be Dickens' most appreciative reader. That's never stated. Okay, that's never stated. It's never insinuated. It's pretty far off. Questions 11 through 21 are based on the following passage in supplementary material. This passage is adapted from Jeffrey Mervis, Why No Results Rarely See the Light of Day, copyright 2014 by American Association for the Advancement of Science. The question of what to do with null results when researchers fail to see an effect that should be detectable has long been hotly debated among those conducting medical trials, where the results can have a big impact on lives and corporate bottom lines. More recently, the debate has spread to the social and behavioral sciences, which also have the potential to sway public and social policy. There were little hard data, however, on how often or why null results were squelched. Yes, it's true that null results are not as exciting, political scientist Gary King of Harvard University says, but I suspect another reason they are rarely published is that there are many, many ways to produce null results by messing up. So they are much harder to interpret. In a recent study, Stanford political economist Neil Malhotra and 2 of his graduate students examined every study since 2002 that was funded by a competitive grants program called TESS, Time Sharing Experiments for the Social Sciences. TESS allows scientists to order up internet-based surveys of a representative sample of U.S. adults to test a particular hypothesis. For example, whether voters tend to favor legislators who boast of bringing federal dollars to their districts or those who tout a focus on policy matters. Malhotra's team tracked down working papers from most of the experiments that weren't published, and for the rest asked grantees what had happened to their results. In their emailed responses, some scientists cited deeper problems with the study or more pressing matters, but many also believed the journals just wouldn't be interested. The unfortunate reality of the publishing world is that null effects do not tell a clear story, said one scientist. Said another, never published, definitely disappointed to not see any major effects. Their answer suggests to Malhotra that rescuing findings from the file drawer will require a shift in expectations. What needs to change is the culture. The author's belief about what will happen if the research is written up, he says. Not unexpectedly, the statistical strength of the findings made a huge difference in whether they were ever published. Overall, 42% of the experiments produced statistically significant results. Of those, 62% were ultimately published, compared with 21% of the null results. However, the Stanford team was surprised that the researchers didn't even write up 65% of the experiments that yielded a null finding. Scientists not involved in the study praised its clever design. It's a very important paper that starts to put numbers on the things we want to understand, says economist Edward Miguel of the University of California, Berkeley. He and others note that the bias against null studies can waste time and money when researchers devise new studies replicating strategies already found to be ineffective. Worse, if researchers publish significant results from similar experiments in the future, they could look stronger than they should. Hang on a minute. Let's go down. All right, they could look stronger than they should because the earlier null studies are ignored. Even more troubling to Malhotra was the fact that 2 scientists whose initial studies didn't work out went on to publish results based on a smaller sample. The non-test version of the same study, in which we used a student sample, did yield fruit, noted one investigator. A registry for data generated by all experiments would address these problems, the authors argue. They say it should also include a pre-analysis plan that is a detailed description of what the scientist hopes to achieve and how the data will be analyzed. Such plans would help deter researchers from tweaking their analyses after the data are collected in search of more publishable results. Okay, now that we've read through the passage, let's go over our questions. We have question 11. The passage primarily serves to do what? Okay, if we think about ultimately the goal of the passage, right, is to try to advance this idea that we should be writing up our null results, right? So that way we have, new studies that don't look stronger than they should be, ultimately, helping save time and resources. So we've got option A, discuss recent findings concerning scientific studies and dispute a widely held belief about the publication of social science research. We're not really disputing any sort of widely held belief there about the publication of the research. Okay, and then if we look at what came before it, discuss recent findings concerning scientific studies. Right there, that's not looking too strong. I'm not going to let's look at B, C, and D a minute. We've got B, explaining common practice in the reporting of research studies. Okay, so ultimately not writing things up if there's no results. That makes sense. And summarize a study. Okay, so this new study, right, where they called all these people who used tests to see if they ultimately wrote up their results. That provides support for a change to that practice. Yes, okay, that's a key part. Okay, supporting the change for the practice, right? That's something that A lacks, right? Ultimately, we want to also focus on the goal of providing a change to this practice. Okay, so B looks really strong there. B will be our answer. If we look at C and D a minute, we've got C, describe the shortcomings in current approaches to medical trials. That's too narrow on medical trials. We can get rid of C. Okay, and then we have D, provide context as part of a call for stricter controls on social science research. We're not saying we need stricter controls. We're just saying that, we need to publish no results, or, at least write them up, not necessarily publish, but at least write them up. And then challenge publishers to alter their mindsets. This isn't to do with publishers, this is to deal with the scientists. If we look at number 12 now, okay, number 12, as used in line 21, allows most nearly means what? Well, let's take a look at line 21. Okay, so we have TESS allows scientists to order up internet-based surveys of a representative sample of U.S. adults to test a particular hypothesis. All right, so ultimately there, when we say TESS allows a scientist to do this, it's pretty much, giving them the ability to. That's what we pretty much mean there by allows. So giving them the ability to, another word for that would be, something like enables, and answer choice D. Okay, grants here, in the context of this passage, enables more closely means allows here, okay, allows them to ultimately order up the survey. It's not granting them, okay? A grant would, if we say grants, typically that's going to have more so to do with, someone giving someone funding. In this case, it doesn't have to do with funding. It has to do with them giving them the ability to order up these representative survey samples, right? So it's giving them the ability to, which would more clearly mean enables, right? And then obviously I just talked about grants. Okay, it wouldn't mean tolerates or admits here. Those two are pretty far off. Okay, and then we look at number 13 now. As used in line 43, strength most nearly means what? Let's take a look at line 43. We'll see what strength means in context. I'll highlight it in green. Okay, so we have not unexpectedly the statistical strength of the findings made a huge difference in whether they were ever published. When we say the statistical strength, obviously we're referring to statistical significance, something along those lines. Okay, so how strong the data was. So statistical strength, statistical significance, not attribution, right? I'm sorry, that should be a cross out, not a highlight. Okay, so not attribution, obviously, not exertion, not toughness, statistical significance, or statistical strength, right? That one's pretty clear. All right, moving on to 14. The passage indicates that a problem with failing to document null results is that what? Okay, so ultimately, one of our main claims about failing to document null results is that we have, other studies that are on like the same topic that'll look stronger than they would if we also had these ones that were written up with null results. We have option A, the results of related studies will be misleading. Yes, we do talk directly about that when we say that we have, if new results are published in the future and they look strong, they could look stronger than they really are due to not documenting these null results. So answer there would be A. Now, if we look for evidence, which would be question 15 then, okay, we're looking for keywords dealing with, related studies, similar studies, and then ultimately, how that would be misleading. So something looking stronger than it should. So we got the option of there to expectations, no strong keywords there. However, to finding, potentially a contrast, so that's not necessarily a bad place to start there. Key to ineffective, that's not a great keyword as far as ineffective, but maybe. And then we have worse. Okay, so describing something that's bad, right? One thing that would be bad would be if we have, studies that are misleading. So that's a really strong place to start. So I'd probably go 1, 2, and then 3, and then 4 as far as where I'm going to start looking. So I'm going to start at 59 to 62 because that has the strongest keyword there of worse, and we want to indicate that something is misleading, which is obviously bad. So 59 to 62, if we look there, we're going to have worse if researchers publish, I'll go ahead and highlight it, worse if researchers publish significant results from similar experiments in the future. They could look stronger than they should because the earlier null studies are ignored. Okay, so showing if earlier null studies are ignored, we have experiments in the future are going to look stronger than they should. That's obviously a negative result. Okay, so our answer there will be 59 to 62. Okay, so if we go down, it's going to be 59 to 62. Okay, it's very clear that that's ultimately supporting the fact that failing to document null results will result in the results of related studies being misleading. Okay, it's going to look stronger than they actually are. 16. Based on the passage to which of the following hypothetical situations would Malhotra most strongly object? We'll just go A through D here. We've got option A. A research team refuses to publish null results in anything less than a top journal. Okay, that wouldn't really make sense as far as something that he would strongly object to. He just wants it published. He doesn't care if it's a top journal or a non-top journal. B, a research team excludes the portion of data that produced null results when reporting its results in a journal. Okay, he would object to that. I believe that he even gives an example of him objecting to that. So I'm curious if we have evidence. Okay, we do have evidence for our next one. Okay, so ultimately we want to find that example where he objects to someone getting rid of a portion of their data, right? He would want them to include all of their data in their study. So we've got said to effects. That's not really indicating data, null results. That's a really, really strong keyword. So I'm actually probably going to start there. And then we have even to investigator. Not really any strong keywords there. And then analyze, potentially analyzing results there. So I'd probably go there too. We'd probably go here 3 and 4. As far as location in the passage, this does seem a bit early, but I'll just start there. These two right here, C and D, they look more so as far as the location as where it'd be. But I'll go ahead and start with 1. So we have overall the null results 45 to 48. So let me go up 45 to 48. So we have overall 42% of the experiments produced statistically significant results. Of those, 62% were published, 21% had null results. Okay, so nothing indicating that he would object to someone doing something there. So that's going to be wrong. If we go down, we'll go ahead and look next at 69 to 73, a registry to analyzed. 69 to 73, a registry for data generated by all experiments would address these problems. The author argue. They say it should include a pre-analysis plan. Okay, so that's not indicating he would object to that either. So we'll go to our third option then. We've got 62 to 68, so even to investigator. If we go up there, 62 to 68, let's see where that's at. Okay, so we have even more troubling. Okay, so now we're indicating something's troubling to him, was the fact that 2 scientists whose initial studies didn't work out went on to publish results based on a smaller sample, or in other words, excluding data. The non-test version of the same study in which we used a student sample did yield fruit noted 1, so that's obviously indicating he has a problem with that, so that's perfect there. Okay, it's showing that he would be troubled by that. Okay, so our answer there would be C for number 17. Obviously, that's clearly supporting 16, where we said a research team that excludes a portion of data that produced null results when reporting its results. Obviously, he would object to that, right? It shows that he was troubled by it. Okay, and then we go on to 18. The last paragraph serves mainly to do what? We can take a quick look at the last paragraph. Okay, we see ultimately we have him advocating for a registry for data generated by all experiments, right? So even if they yield null results, including a pre-analysis plan, giving a detailed description of what's going to be analyzed, what it hopes to achieve. Okay, so him ultimately basically providing a potential solution for this problem of not publishing null results. So that's pretty much all he's doing there, is advocating for a solution, or proposing a solution. So we have A, propose a future research project. It's not a research project. To deal with some of the shortcomings of current publishing practices, no. B, introduce a possible solution, yes. 2 problems discussed in the passage regarding the reporting of social science studies, yeah, that's perfect, right? He's providing a solution to the problems that he talked about in this passage. Okay, so our answer there will be B. We'll look at C and D, and I'll show why those are wrong as well real quick, just to explain. We have C, summarize the findings of a study. He's not summarizing findings there. He's proposing a solution. And then we have D, reinforce the importance of re-examining results. No. Okay, and then number 19, looks like it's below it. According to the graph, social science studies yielding strong results were what? We'll look at social science studies yielding strong results. I see I've got strong results as my bar here. Okay, we'll just kind of get a general idea of what it looks like. We have published in a top journal. It looks to be 20% of the time. We've got this bar right here is going to be about 40%, and that's going to be published in a non-top journal, so it's published more than half the time. And then we have unpublished but written, looks to be about 35-ish, and then we have unwritten about 5%. Okay, so if we go down, we've got option A, unwritten over 50% of the time. We know that they are written over 50% of the time. B, unpublished but written 50% of the time. We know it's actually going to be written but unpublished but written 50% of the time. We know that they're ultimately published 60% of the time, so that wouldn't make sense. C, published in a top journal approximately 20% of the time. Yes, we did see that. Okay, and then D, published in a non-top journal almost 80%. We know that that's not true. Number 20 now, which of the following statements is supported by the graph? We have option A. Let's actually get a better idea of what our graph is showing a minute real quick. We go up. Okay, we've got mixed results. We see ultimately we have less publication there, and then even smaller publication up here and null results. All right, then if we go down, we've got which of the following statements is supported? Option A, studies with mixed results were just as likely to be published as they were to be left either unpublished or unwritten. We can quick take a look at that. So it'd have to be split 50-50 here then, which we see that it is, right? We have them being unpublished or unwritten in this bottom 50%, right, which includes both of these, and then in them being published in that top 50 for the mixed results, right? So our answer there would be A for number 20. Going down to 21 now. Which statement from the passage is most directly reflected by the data presented in the graph? Okay, that's ultimately going to be where we talk about those with stronger results being published more often. Published right here, obviously the strongest keyword we could really have there. So we can go ahead and take a look there to start, 43 to 45. Okay, 43 to 45, we have not unexpectedly statistical strength of the findings made a huge difference in whether they were ever published. Yeah, that's perfect, right? Ultimately, directly describing what we ultimately see in that figure or that table or graph. Okay, so the graph there. Okay, so our answer there for number 21 would be answer choice C. Okay, so let me go ahead and circle that for you. This passage is adopted from Rachel Ehrenberg's Salt Stretches in the Nano World, copyright 2009 by Society for Science and the Public. The nano world is the world observed on a scale 1/1000th that of ordinary human experience. Inflexible old salt becomes a softie in the nano world, stretching like taffy to more than twice its length, researchers report. The findings may lead to new approaches for making nanowires that could end up in solar cells or electronic circuits. The work also suggests that these ultra-tiny salt wires may already exist in sea spray and large underground salt deposits. We think nanowires are special and go to great lengths to make them, says study co-author Nathan Moore of Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque. Maybe they are more common than we think. Metals such as gold or lead, in which bonding angles are loosey-goosey, can stretch out at temperatures well below their melting points. But scientists don't expect that the superplasticity in a rigid crystalline material like salt, Moore says. This unusual behavior highlights that different forces rule the nanoworld, says theoretical physicist Christoph Kempe of Boston College. Forget about gravity, it plays no role, he says. Surface tension and electrostatic forces are much more important at this scale. Moore and his colleagues discovered salt stretchiness accidentally. They were investigating how water sticks to a surface such as salt and created a super dry salt sample for testing. After cleaving a chunk of salt about the size of a sugar cube with a razor, the scientists guided a microscope that detects forces toward the surface. When the tip was far away, there was no measured force, but within about 7 nanometers, a very strong attraction rapidly developed between the diamond tip of the microscope and the salt. The salt actually stretched out to glom onto the microscope tip. Using an electron microscope to see what was happening, the researchers observed the nanowires. The initial attraction between the tip and the salt might be due to electrostatic forces, perhaps good old van der Waals interactions, the researchers speculate. Several mechanisms might lead to this elasticity, including the excessive surface tension found in the nanoworld, the same tension that allows a water strata to skim the surface of a pond. The surface tension is so strong that as the microscope pulls away from the salt stretches, Kempe says. The inside has no choice but to rearrange the atoms rather than break, he says. This bizarre behavior is actually mirrored in the macro world, the researchers say. Huge underground salt deposits can bend like plastic, but water is believed to play a role at these scales. Perhaps salty nanowires are present in these deposits as well. Sodium chloride is everywhere, in the air, in our bodies, Moore says. This may change our view of things, of what's happening at the nanoscale. The work also suggests new techniques for making nanowires, which are often created through nanoimprinting techniques, Kempe says. We invoke the intuition of the macro world, he says. Maybe instead of stamping nanowires, we should be nanopulling them. All right, now that we've gone through the passage, let's go ahead and go over the questions. So the first question we have is 22. One central idea of the passage is that what? Well, if we think ultimately about what the goal of this passage is to do, it's to describe how salt, which we normally think of as a solid material that's not mobile or tactile, is something that can actually be stretched in the nano world. And we also mentioned that it can be stretched in the macro world, but the focus here tends to be on the nano world. Okay, so we have option A. Sometimes materials behave contrary to expectations. Yes, right? What's our material behaving contrary to expectations? It's the salt. Why is it contrary to expectations? Because we expect, and I believe we said a rigid material or rigid crystalline like salt, we expect that not to be able to stretch, but we obviously see that it does in the nano world. Okay, so our answer for 22 would be A. I'll go ahead and show you why B, C, and D are incorrect as well real quick. We have B, systems can be described in terms of inputs and outputs. We don't touch on inputs and outputs, so B is incorrect. C, models of materials have both strengths and weaknesses. We're not really talking about a model here, so C is incorrect. D, properties of systems differ from properties of their parts. We're never splitting salt up into any of its component parts, so D doesn't make any sense either. All right, looking at 23. Which choice best describes the overall structure of the passage? Okay, well, if we think about this passage, right? Obviously, towards the end, we start talking about the applications of this, right? The applications of salt being able to stretch. We talk about how it could potentially be used, in nanowires, right? In making nanowires, I can go and highlight that for you. Okay, we also start talking about how, underground salt deposits bend like plastic. So that's sort of touching on, connecting it back to the macro world a little bit. Talking a lot about towards the end, sort of about application. If we go towards the beginning, the introduction is really just focused on describing, the nano world at large and kind of how salt, works in the nano world. And then we go into this new discovery. So the new discovery is really in the middle. Okay, so we need to find an answer choice that touches on those points. We have option A. A list of several ways in which salt's properties differ from researchers' expectations. We're not just listing things off, so that's why A is wrong. And then B, a presentation of a hypothesis regarding salt behavior, a description of an associated experiment, and an explanation of why the results weaken the hypothesis. Okay, this part's way off. Okay, at the end, we definitely are not talking about an explanation of why the results weaken the hypothesis. That's way off. C, a description of 2 salt crystal experiments. We're not describing 2 different experiments, so C is incorrect. And then D, which will be our correct answer. An introduction to an interesting salt property, the fact it can stretch in the nanoworld, description of how it was discovered, and then speculation regarding how it can be applied, in other words, with those nanowires. So D is perfect. All right, looking at 24, which choice provides the best evidence for the claim that Moore's group was surprised to observe salt stretching? In this case, I know that was mostly towards the beginning, okay, so I can kind of get rid of 55 to 56 because that's more than likely way too far deep into the passage. Next thing I'll look at is sort of the keyword test, right? So we're looking for them to be surprised to observe the stretching, so anything dealing with stretching or them being surprised is what I'd be looking at. Right here in A, I see I have but, which indicates a contrast, so potentially a contrast from expectation, so that's where I would start in this case, because in B and C, I really don't see anything about it really stretching that much. So I'm going to go ahead and start with lines 17 to 18. Also, I know that that's probably where it's, more so located because it's towards the beginning when we start introducing this. So 17 to 18, go ahead and highlight that in yellow, or I'm sorry, orange. Right, we have it right here, but scientists don't expect the superplasticity or the stretch in a rigid crystalline material like salt, Moore says. So that's showing that they didn't expect the material to be able to stretch, therefore that they're surprised salt can stretch, so therefore our answer then would be answer choice A for 24. Looking at 25 now, as used in line 20, rule most nearly means what? Well, let's go to line 20, we'll find the word rule, and then we'll come up with our own answer first so we don't end up getting stuck between 2 answer choices. All right, so I'll go and highlight this in orange so it's clear to see. We have this unusual behavior highlights that different forces rule the nanoworld, says theoretical physicist, right, and then whatever the guy's name is. So ultimately when we go through this sentence, in the context of this, and showing that different forces rule the nanoworld, in other words, different forces control the nanoworld, right? That's really the only synonym I can see being a possibility here, so I'm assuming it's an answer choice. I see it is an answer choice B. Okay, so my answer there would be B. I'll show you why A, C, and D are incorrect as well, because that's important to understand. Okay, we wouldn't say that, when we say rule the nanoworld, that's not talking about it being a mark. It's talking about how it controls the nanoworld, right? Those forces control it. They don't mark the nanoworld. The forces control it. The forces don't declare the nanoworld, and they also aren't restraining it. Okay, when we say that the forces rule the nanoworld, we're saying that they control the nanoworld. Okay, so 25 is not too bad. That's a pretty simple one. 26, according to the passage, researchers have identified which mechanism as potentially responsible for the initial attraction between the microscope tip and the salt. Okay, so we need to determine the mechanism for the initial attraction, right? So if we go up to our passage, that's going to be where we talk about that experiment, right, when they brought that microscope tip closer. Okay, so I see that that's going to be, after this point for sure, because that's when we start talking about the experiment and the investigation. So then if we kind of look for where we start talking about the salt stretching, okay, the salt stretched onto the microscopic tip. Now we need to find what's causing this. I see I have the initial attraction between the tip. Might be due to electrostatic forces, perhaps good old van der Waals interactions. So I'm going to look for an answer choice that talks about van der Waals interactions. I see I have that in answer choice D, so D will be my correct answer there. Okay, going to 27. As used in line 42, lead to means most nearly means what? So we'll go to line 42. I'll highlight lead to so you can clearly see it. Okay, I'm just going to go up here so it's easier to see. Okay, so we have several mechanisms might lead to elasticity, including the excessive surface tension found in the nanoworld. In this case, when we say several mechanisms might lead to elasticity, we could also say that they might cause the elasticity or result in the elasticity. Ultimately, we need to kind of show a causal relationship. Okay, so if we go down, we have the option of guide to. No, that's not showing that it's a cause. Okay, result in. Okay, saying something's the result of something is indicating that it was a cause of something, so B would be perfect. If we look at C and D, point toward, that's not indicating a causal relationship, and start with is also not indicating a causal relationship. So our answer there has to be B because it's the only answer choice that indicates that there was a direct cause and effect. Okay, looking at 28. Based on the passage, which choice best describes the relationship between salt behavior in the nano world and in the macro world? All right, so in this case, we want to touch on nano world, macro world, how does salt behave in each? Okay, we know that we end up talking about how salt can stretch in both. Okay, we provide an example of how it can stretch in the nano world with the experiment, and then also the macro world where when we talk about, these massive the groupings of salt. I can't remember exactly what they're called, but I know that they both stretch. So we have option A in both the nano world and the macro world. Salt can be flexible. Yes, that's perfect. Okay, I'm assuming we might have evidence for our next one, and we see that we do. All right, so in this case, just providing evidence to show that it's flexible in the nano and macro world. So if we're, trying to figure out where that is. We know it's not really right in the beginning. It comes more so towards the middle/end. Okay, so I'm definitely not going to really be looking at A or B right off the bat. The next thing that I'll be thinking about is a keyword. In this case, finding a keyword talking about how salt stretches, or in the nano and macro worlds would be something to do with scales. Okay, the reason why is we have scales plural, right? Nano world, macro world, those are two different size scales. So I would start with lines 51 to 53 here. Okay, so let me go up there. I see 51 to 53. We have huge underground deposits of salt can bend like plastic, but water is believed to play a role at these scales. All right, so obviously at that point, we're showing how it can bend in the macro world. So that will be our answer there. Okay, we've already pretty much shown that it can bend in the micro world. Okay, so our answer there would be D. One thing that I will do is I will quickly check these lines just to see if there's anything showing that, we talk about micro and macro at the same time, but I don't think we do because, and actually I'm not going to check those because I know we don't, because this was the only spot where we gave an example or evidence of stretching of salt in the macro world. Okay, because we don't discuss bending of salt in the macro world really till 50 and beyond. So it actually wouldn't make sense to go back and check earlier. Okay, so we know our answer there has to be 51 to 53. All right, number 30, according to the information in the graph, when the microscope tip is moving away from the salt surface and is 15 nanometers from the surface, what is the approximate force on the microscopic tip in micronewtons? All right, so I'm looking for when the tip's 15 meters away. Okay, so I see 15 nanometers, right? So I see that 15 there. Keep in mind, I need to go to the one that's moving away from the salt surface, not the one that's moving toward the salt surface. So if I draw this line up and over, I see that that's going to be about 0.75-ish. Okay, so I'll go down. I see that that's answer choice C, so C would be my answer there. Looking at 31, based on the passage and graph, which label on the graph indicates the point at which a salt nanowire breaks? Okay, where it breaks is going to be where we see that sharp drop, right? So when it's moving away from the salt surface, where is it breaking? That's when the force is 0. That indicates that it broke, so that's going to be at T. Okay, so my answer there would be answer choice D. Questions 32 to 41 are based on the following passages. These passages are adopted from the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Passage 1 is from a statement by Stephen Douglas. Passage 2 is from a statement by Abraham Lincoln. Douglas and Lincoln engaged in a series of debates while competing for a U.S. Senate seat in 1858. Passage 1. Mr. Lincoln likens that bond of the federal Constitution joining free and slave states together to a house divided against itself, and says that it is contrary to the law of God and cannot stand. When did he learn, and by what authority does he proclaim that this government is contrary to the law of God and cannot stand? It has stood thus divided into free and slave states from its organization up to this day. During that period, we have increased from 4 million to 30 millions of people. We have extended our territory from the Mississippi to the Pacific Ocean. We have acquired the Floridas and Texas and other territory sufficient to double our geographic extent. We have increased in population, in wealth, and in power beyond any example on earth. We have risen from a weak and feeble power to become the terror and admiration of the civilized world. And all this has been done under a constitution which Mr. Lincoln, in substance, says is in violation of the law of God, and under a union divided into free and slave states, which Mr. Lincoln thinks, because of such division, cannot stand. Surely Mr. Lincoln is a wiser man than those who framed the government. I now come back to the question, why cannot this union exist forever, divided into free and slave states as our fathers made it? It can thus exist if each state will carry out the principles upon which our institutions were founded, to wit, the right of each state to do as it pleases, without meddling with its neighbors. Just act upon that great principle, and this union will not only live forever, but it will extend and expand until it covers the whole continent and makes this confederacy one grand ocean-bound republic. We must bear in mind that we are yet a young nation, growing with a rapidity unequaled in the history of the world, that our national increase is great, and that the emigration from the old world is increasing, requiring us to expand and acquire a new territory from time to time, in order to give our people land to live upon. If we live upon the principle of state rights and state sovereignty, each state regulating its own affairs, minding its own business, we can go on and extend indefinitely, just as fast and as far as we need the territory. All right, now that we've read through passage 1, let's go ahead and answer the questions associated with it. So we have question 32. In the first paragraph of passage 1, the main purpose of Douglas's discussion of the growth of the territory and population of the United States is to do what? Okay, in this case, we know that when he's referring to that growth in the territory and population of the state, ultimately, his point is to show that we don't have to change anything, right? Okay, that we're growing, and therefore, because we're growing underneath the system that we currently have, we don't need to change it, right? The system is doing well. Okay, so if we go ahead and go down to our answer choices, we have option A, provide context for Douglas's defense of continued expansion. Okay, no. And then B, suggest that the division into free and slave states does not endanger the Union. Yes, okay. We know that we are currently divided into free and slave states at this point in time of the writing, obviously. And he's arguing that we have expanded during that time while we've been divided, okay? And there's no reason to say that we can't continue doing so. Therefore, it does not endanger the Union. That's the author, that's the primary argument that Douglas is making in that first paragraph. Okay, if we look at C and D, imply that Lincoln is unaware of basic facts concerning the country. Okay, that's off. And then if we look at D, account for the image of the United States as powerful and admirable. That's not the main point there. The main point is to show that, yes, we are divided, but in this time that we're divided, we are still expanding, and therefore this does not endanger the Union because we've been successful, well divided in the past, and therefore he expects that to continue in the future. 33. What does passage 1 suggest about the U.S. government's provisions for the institution of slavery as framed in the Constitution? Ultimately, we know that the author of passage 1, his main argument is that the Constitution is fine and there's no need to change it. Okay, he's arguing for states' rights as given to them in the Constitution, and he just wants that to stay the same. So we have option A. They included no means for reconciling differences between free and slave states. No. Option B. They anticipated the Union's expansion into Western territories. No. And then C. They provided a good basic structure that does not need to be changed. Yes. Okay. Ultimately, we know the author of passage 1 is saying, hey, the Constitution was good. It's allowed us to expand, from 4 million people to 30 million people. Therefore, it's providing a good basic structure. We don't have to change it, right? He's just saying that states should have the right to decide if they want slavery or not. And then we have option D. They were founded on an assumption that slavery was necessary for economic growth. We never make this claim here, that it was necessary for economic growth. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at 34. So we have which choice provides the best evidence for the choice for the answer to the previous question. Okay, we know that they provide a good basic structure that does not need to be changed. We know that our ultimate evidence for that is where we talk about how we've been able to expand underneath the system, and that where we talk about our how the Constitution ultimately is allowing for this. So if we go up here, okay, we know in our answer choices, right? So we kind of know where to look if we take a look here. Okay, we know that 41 to 45 seems pretty late in the text for us to be arguing this. Same thing with sort of 35 to 39. So I'm kind of looking at A and B as far as where I would start first. Then from there, I'll look at the keyword strategy. We have made it and earth. I know there's not really any good keywords there. So we can just start with 10 to 16 and then we'll look at 25 to 26. So 10 to 16 says we have extended our territory from the Mississippi to the Pacific Ocean. We have acquired the Floridas and Texas and our other sufficient territory to double our geographical extent. We have increased in population, wealth, and in power beyond any example on earth. We see that at that point, we're never really, connecting that back to the Constitution being fine as it is. So we can go ahead and get rid of answer choice A. Then if we look at 25 to 27, keep in mind that we have to show that the Constitution provides a good basic structure that doesn't have to be changed. So if we look at 25 to 27, I now come back to this question: why cannot the Union exist forever, divided into free and slave states as our fathers made it? Okay, referencing that as our fathers made it is connecting it back to the Constitution, because we know the founding fathers are the people who made that Constitution. So we're connecting it back to the Constitution, saying that we can exist forever divided into free and slave states, or in other words, the way that the Constitution has it set up, where each state decides for itself if it's free or a slave state, is ultimately fine according to the author. So therefore, we know that our evidence then would be answer choice B, okay, that 25 to 27. Okay, answer choices C and D we see are going to end up coming way too far along anyways. So we don't really have to necessarily look there. We obviously saw that answer choice B was going to be correct when we looked at those lines. Okay, looking at 35 now. As used in line 67, element most nearly means what? Well, in 67, that's going to be in passage 2. So let's go ahead and start reading through passage 2. In complaining of what I said in my speech at Springfield, in which he says I accepted my nomination for the senatorship, he again quotes that portion in which I said that a house divided against itself cannot stand. Let me say a word in regard to that matter. He tries to persuade us that there must be a variety in the different institutions of the states of the Union, that variety necessarily proceeds from the variety of soil, climate, of the face of the country, and the difference in the natural features of the states. I agree to all that. Have these very matters ever produced any difficulty among us? Not at all. Have we ever had any quarrel over the fact that they have laws in Louisiana designated to regulate the commerce that springs from the production of sugar, or because we have a different class relative to the production of flour in this state? Have they produced any differences? Not at all. They are the very cements of this union. They don't make the house a house divided against itself. They are the props that hold up the house and sustain the union. But has it been so with this element of slavery? Have we not always had quarrels and difficulties over it? And when will we cease to have quarrels over it? Like causes produce like effects. It is worthwhile to observe that we have generally had comparative peace upon the slavery question, and that there has been no cause for alarm until it was excited by the effort to spread it into new territory. Whenever it has been limited to its present bounds and there have been no effort to spread it, there has been peace. All the trouble and convulsion has proceeded from efforts to spread it over more territory. It was thus at the date of the Missouri Compromise. It was so again with the annexation of Texas, so with the territory acquired by the Mexican War, and it is so now. Whenever there has been an effort to spread it, there has been an agitation and resistance. Do you think that the nature of man will be changed, that the same causes that produced agitation at one time will not have the same effect at another? All right, now we can answer question 35 and all the way to the rest of the end of these questions. So we have As used in line 67, element most nearly means what? Well, let's go to line 67. Okay, I'll highlight element in orange so it's clear to see. Okay, we have element right here, okay, but has it been so with this element of slavery? In this case, I'd be looking for something like this issue of slavery, okay, ultimately we're referring to the issue. Okay, so we need something kind of representing issue. So has it been so with this issue of slavery? We have ingredient, okay, that would make no sense. Environment also would make no sense. Factor, potentially. Quality would also make no sense, okay? When we say an issue of slavery, we would also kind of be referring to a factor of slavery, right? Same thing with element, right? Saying the element of slavery, the issue of slavery, it's really kind of focusing in on that topic, in which case factor would be the best answer choice out of all of these. All right, looking at 36 now. Based on passage 2, Lincoln would be most likely to agree with which claim about the controversy over slavery? In this case, we just got to go A through D till we find the right answer, right? So we have option A. It can be ended only if northern states act unilaterally to abolish slavery. The focus isn't on abolishing slavery, okay? The focus is on just making sure it doesn't spread to new states. We have option B. It would abate if attempts were to introduce slavery to regions where it is not practiced were abandoned, okay? Yes, ultimately, Lincoln would agree, okay, that we should not expand slavery into places that hasn't already been. Okay, and we obviously know that. I see that we have evidence for our next line. Okay, so we'll go ahead and show evidence for this as well. All right, this is going to be where we talk about spreading it. Okay, so spreading, when we talk about that, it doesn't really start in the beginning. So I wouldn't start by looking at A. Kind of look in this area to start here. Okay, and then also I kind of want to try to find a keyword where we potentially talk about, spreading it. Okay, so right here when I see peace, okay, I can kind of remember back where he said, there has been peace when we don't try to spread it. So that's where I'm going to start looking. So 74 to 76. We'll see if that's, what I'm remembering. So I'm going to highlight this in orange. Okay, so that's going to be whenever it has been limited to its present bounds and there has been no effort to spread it, there has been peace. Okay, so essentially saying that if we don't try to spread this, there'll be peace, therefore supporting our answer in 36. Okay, we don't want to, spread slavery to where it's not currently practiced. Okay, so our answer there would be answer choice C for number 37 then. Okay, moving on to 38, as used in line 84, nature most nearly means what? Well, let's go to line 84. We'll take a look at the word nature. Okay, I'll highlight this as well. All right, so 84, word is nature. All right, so we have, do you think that the nature of man will be changed, that the same causes that produce agitation at one time will not have the same effect on another? Okay, keep in mind that in the context of this, we're talking about how men have been agitated, and resistant to spreading slavery to new territories. So do you think that the nature of man will be changed? That another word there would be something dealing with, sort of the morals of man. So anything like that. So let's go ahead and scroll down. We'll see if we have something along those lines, like morals, character. That's ultimately what we're referring to when we're saying the nature of man here. All right. Okay, so like I said, we need something dealing with sort of morals or character. I see we do have character. We don't have morals. Our other options would be force, simplicity, and world. None of those would make sense in this context, so our answer there would be D. All right, looking at 39 now. Which choice identifies a central tension between the two passages? Obviously, we have Douglas, who's the author of the first passage. His ultimate, claim here is that it should be a state-by-state issue, right? New states should have the choice whether or not they want to be a slave state or a free state, whereas Lincoln's arguing that any new states should just be free. Okay, so we have to find an answer choice representing that. We have option A. Douglas proposes changes to federal policies on slavery. Lincoln argues that such changes would enjoy no popular support. We don't really talk about popular support, so A's, and overall in A, it's just pretty far off. B. Douglas expresses concerns about the economic impact of abolition. Okay, once again, the focus isn't on abolition here. It's about the spread into new states. Okay, so B is incorrect. C. Douglas criticizes Lincoln for finding fault with the Constitution. Okay, that's correct that Douglas does criticize him for finding fault with the Constitution, right? Douglas is ultimately saying Lincoln is trying to, prevent things being a state-by-state issue. He's trying to make it, a unilateral decision federally to make new states free. Okay, and then Lincoln argues this criticism misrepresents his position. Yes, Lincoln does make that argument, right? We see Lincoln going back after him saying, when it's an issue that can be on a state-by-state basis that doesn't cause, maybe like rioting and mass disapproval, then that's fine. But he says that this issue of slavery is different, so C would be our answer there. We'll take a look at D as well here. We have Douglas offers an interpretation of federal law that conflicts with Lincoln's, and Lincoln implies that Douglas's interpretation is poorly reasoned. Okay, in this case, we're not really concerned so much with any sort of interpretation of federal law. Okay, we're more concerned with the Constitution, right, and the constitutional aspect of these two arguments. Okay, so our answer there would be C. Looking at 40, both passages discuss the issue of slavery in relationship to what? We have option A, the expansion of the Union. Yes, okay. The big issue here is whether new states will be added as free or slave states. 41 now. In the context of each passage as a whole, the questions in line 25 to 27 of passage 1 and line 67 to 69 of passage 2 primarily function to help each speaker do what? Okay, we'll go take a look at those lines. It was 25 to 27 and I think 65 to 69. 25 to 27, we're using this rhetorical question. I now come back to the question, why cannot union exist forever, divided into free and slave states as our fathers made it? So trying to use the Constitution to support, his argument that it should be a state-by-state issue. And then our other lines were 65 to 69, I believe. So we have, they are props that hold up the house and sustain the union, but has it been so with this element of slavery? Have we not always had quarrels and difficulties over it? Okay, so Lincoln then turning back this rhetorical question to sort of go against the first author's argument, saying that it's different with this issue of slavery. So they're both kind of going after each other's argument, with the author of passage 1 going after Lincoln's argument with the Constitution, and then Lincoln going back at him saying that this is a different issue. So we have option A, cast doubt on the other's sincerity. They both, would not really doubt each other's sincerity at all. Okay, they both know each other are sincere. B, criticize the other's methods. They don't criticize each other's methods. B is pretty far off. Reproach the other's actions. Once again, we're not dealing with another person's actions here. And then our answer then would be D, undermine the other's argument, which they are trying to do. Questions 42 to 52 are based on the following passage. This passage is adopted from Daniel Chamovitz, What a Plant Knows, A Field Guide to the Senses, copyright 2012 by Daniel Chamovitz. The Venus flytrap needs to know when an ideal meal is crawling across its leaves. Closing its trap requires a huge expense of energy, and reopening the trap can take several hours. So Dionanea only wants to spring closed when it's sure that the dawdling insect visiting its surface is large enough to be worth its time. The large black hairs on their lobes allow the Venus flytraps to literally feel their prey, and they act as triggers that spring the trap closed when the proper prey makes its way across the trap. If the insect touches just one hair, the trap will not spring shut, but a large enough bug will likely touch 2 hairs within about 20 seconds, and that signal springs the Venus flytrap into action. We can look at this system as analogous to short-term memory. First, the flytrap encodes the information, forms the memory, that something, it doesn't know what, has touched one of its hairs. Then it stores the information for a number of seconds, retains the memory, and finally retrieves the information, recalls the memory once a second hair is touched. If a small ant takes a while to get from one hair to the next, the trap will have forgotten the first touch by the time the ant brushes up against the next hair. In other words, it will lose the storage of the information, doesn't close, and the ant happily meanders on. How does the plant encode and store the information from the unassuming bug's encounter with the first hair? How does it remember the first touch in order to react upon the second? Scientists have been puzzled by these questions ever since John Burden Sanderson's early report on the physiology of the Venus flytrap in 1882. A century later, Dieter Hodik and Andreas Sievers at the University of Bonn in Germany proposed that the flytrap stored information regarding how many hairs may have touched it in the electric charge of the leaf. Their model is quite elegant in its simplicity. In their studies, they discovered that touching a trigger hair on the Venus flytrap causes an electric action potential, a temporary reversal in the electrical polarity of a cell membrane that induces calcium channels to open in the trap. This coupling of action potentials in the opening calcium channels is similar to the processes that occur during communication between human neurons, thus causing a rapid increase in the concentration of calcium ions. They propose that the trap requires a relatively high concentration of calcium in order to close, and that a single action potential from just one trigger hair being touched does not reach this level. Therefore, a second hair needs to be stimulated to push the calcium concentration over this threshold and spring the trap. The encoding of the information requires maintaining a high enough level of calcium so that a second increase, triggered by touching the second hair, pushes the total concentration of calcium over the threshold. As the calcium ion concentrations dissipate over time, if the second touch and potential don't happen quickly, the final concentration after the second trigger won't be high enough to close the trap, and the memory is lost. Subsequent research supports this model. Alexander Volkov and his colleagues at Oakwood University in Alabama first demonstrated that it is indeed electricity that causes the Venus flytrap to close. To test the model, they rigged up very fine electrodes and applied an electrical current to the open loads of the trap. This made the trap close without any direct touch to its trigger hairs. While they didn't measure calcium levels, the current likely led to increases. When they modified this experiment by altering the amount of electrical current, Volkov could determine the exact electrical current needed for the trap to close. As long as 14 microcoulombs, a tiny bit more than the static electricity generated by rubbing 2 balloons together, flowed between the 2 electrodes, the trap closed. This could come as one large burst or as a series of smaller charges within 20 seconds. If it took longer than 20 seconds to accumulate the total charge, the trap would remain open. All right, now that we've read through the passage, we'll go over the questions. So the primary purpose of the passage is to do what? Well, if you think about the primary purpose of this passage, we're ultimately describing, an experiment. Well, we get to that later on, right? We start out by talking about how the Venus flytrap opens and closes, and then we get into an experiment that verifies the initial hypothesis that was, broken, and I think it said like 1982 or around 1980-ish. Okay, so we need an answer choice that kind of talks about that. We have option A, discuss findings that offer a scientific explanation for the Venus flytrap's closing action. Yes, that's perfect. Ultimately, what are we doing? Well, ultimately, we're discussing findings, right, from these, the initial hypothesis and then now this verified experiment that offer that scientific explanation for how it closes. Okay, so A is perfect. We'll go ahead and touch on why B through D are incorrect as well. B says, present research that suggests that Venus flytrap's predatory behavior is both complex and unique among plants. Okay, we never say that it's complex or unique among plants. Also, we never really, focus on their predatory behavior. Keep in mind, we need the primary purpose here. Okay, that's a key word there, is primary. So not just one of the purposes, but the primary purpose. C, identify the process by which Venus flytrap's closing action has evolved. We don't talk about how it's evolved, so that's why C is wrong. D, provide a brief overview of the Venus flytrap and its predatory behavior. Okay, a point of this is not to provide an overview of predatory behavior, it's to talk about the scientific explanation for how the flytrap closes. Looking at 43, based on the passage, a significant advantage of the Venus flytrap's requirements for multiple triggers is that it what? Okay, this one right here, you should be able to kind of fill in the blank on. If we think about this, what is the big advantage? Well, we know that it had limited energy. Okay, so it having multiple triggers prevents it from wasting that energy when it doesn't get enough food from it. We have option A, enables the plant to identify the species of its prey. The plant cannot identify the species of its prey, so A is incorrect. B, conserve the plant's calcium reserves. Okay, we know that it conserves energy, but not calcium reserves. That's why B is wrong. C, safeguards the plant's energy supply. Yes. D, prevents the plant from closing before capturing its prey. Once again there, so that's not going to be our right answer. Why? Because it says prevents the plant from closing before capturing its prey. Ultimately, the advantage of the multiple triggers isn't that it prevents the plant from closing from before capturing its prey, because it prevents the plant from closing on, prey that is too small or not worth that energy that it has to give up. Okay, it looks like next we got some evidence. Okay, so in this case, we want to think about where we talk about energy. Okay, and obviously, as far as keywords go, there really is no indication of anything here. Okay, we also know that all of these are sort of towards the beginning, and we can kind of go 3 through 18. We should be able to find where we talk about energy pretty quickly. Okay, so we'll go ahead and scroll up. Okay, I see several hours. Here, there it is, huge expensive energy right here. Okay, so to find that, all I did is I looked at, 3 through 18, kind of look for where we talk about energy. I see that's going to be right here, so right off the bat. Closing its trap requires a huge expensive energy, and reopening takes several hours, so that only wants to close when it's sure the dwindling insect on the surface is large enough to be worth its time. So it looks like 3 to 7, okay, which I believe is option A. Okay, so our answer for 44 then will be answer choice A. All right, then if we look at number 45, we have the use of the phrases dawdling insect in line 6, happily meanders line 27, and unassuming bugs encounter line 28 to 29. And the first 2 paragraphs establishes a tone. That is what? Well, it's not going to be academic, right? We wouldn't really describe an insect as dawdling if this was academic, or happily meanders, or unassuming bugs encounter. Those aren't academic, they don't establish an academic tone. It's not melodramatic. It is informal though, right? Obviously in a science passage like this, it's pretty informal to describe an insect as dawdling or as happily meandering or anything like that. Okay, and it's not mocking either. Okay, we're not mocking any sort of animal or any person, so that doesn't make sense. All right, going to 46 now. In the second paragraph, lines 15 to 31, the discussion of short-term memory primarily functions to do what? Well, we can go to that. So 15 to 31, discussion of short-term memory. Okay, ultimately see that we are, using an analogy to describe how that fly trap closes, and we're using the analogy of short-term memory, so making this easier to understand by comparing it to something more well-known. So we have option A, clarify an explanation of what prompts the fly trap to close. Most likely that'll be our answer. We can look through B through D to see if there's anything better. B, advance a controversial hypothesis about the function of electrical charges. Okay, we're not advancing a controversial hypothesis there, so that doesn't make any sense. C, stress the distinction between the strategies of the fly trap and human beings. Not even close. Okay, we're not, we're not providing any sort of distinction between humans, and fly traps there. That's not the point of that. D, emphasize the Venus flytrap's capacity for retaining detailed information about its prey. No. Okay, the ultimate point of that, in comparing it to the short-term memory, isn't to show that the flytrap, has capacity for retaining details about its prey. It's to show ultimately how it's closing by comparing it to the more well-known issue of short-term memory. Okay, by comparing it to short-term memory, we get a better idea and a better, understanding. So in other words, clarifying an explanation of what causes the flytrap to close. So A will be our answer there. 47, according to the passage, which statement best explains why the flytrap requires a second trigger hair to be touched within a short amount of time in order for its trap to close? Well, we know that the reason that it requires that second trigger hair is because it has to get that calcium level right up above the threshold. So we have option A, the second trigger produces an electrical charge that reverses the charge produced by the first. No. B, the second trigger stabilizes the surge of calcium created by the first. No. C, the second trigger prompts the calcium channels to open, no. And then D, the second trigger provides a necessary supplement to the calcium concentration released by the first trigger. In other words, providing the needed calcium to get it above the threshold, okay, by providing another boost of calcium. Okay, and then it looks like 48, which choice best describes a scenario in which Hodick and Siever's model predicts that a Venus flytrap will not close around an insect. In this case, we just got to go A through D. We have option A. A large insect's second contact with the plant's trigger hairs results in a total calcium ion concentration above the trap's threshold. Well, in that case, it would close, in which case it would not close, so A is wrong. B, a large insect makes contact with a second trigger hair after a period of inactivity, okay, during which calcium concentrations have diminished appreciably. In that case, it would not close, okay, because its calcium concentration when it hits the second trigger won't go above the threshold to close. So B would be our answer there. Looking at 49 is using line 67. Demonstrated most nearly means what? Well, let's go to line 67. Line 67, we need to look at the word demonstrated, so I'll go and highlight that for you right here. Okay, so we have Alexander Volkolov and his colleagues at Oakwood University in Alabama first demonstrated that it is indeed electricity that causes Venus flytraps to close. In this case, when we say demonstrated, another word would be proved or validated, something along those lines, potentially established, since this is sort of the first time this is occurring where we're proving this. So established, validated, proved would all be good answer choices. Established is probably the best, though, because this is the first time that we are proving this, in which case, obviously established will indicate it's the first time. Okay, so we see proved and validated are not on here, but established is, which is good because that is better than validated or proven, since this is the first time that we're proving it. Okay, so our answer would be B. We wouldn't say protested, that doesn't make any sense, or performed or argued. We're showing that we're proving something for the first time, or in other words, we established it. Okay, 50. Based on the passage, what potential criticism might be made of Volkov's testing of Hodick and Siever's model? Ultimately, in this case, we kind of got to go A through D here. Okay, so we have option A, Volkov's understanding of Hodick and Siever's model is incorrect. Okay, we know that that's not really true. B, Volkov's measurement did not corroborate a central element of Hodick and Siever's model. Okay, for this one, okay, since A through D, right, a lot of it's very detailed. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take a look at my evidence here, just give me an idea of where I want to look. And that's a strategy that you can use if you're a little bit stumped on a question. Okay, so here I see I've got 66, and then ultimately all these answers go up to 77. So I can kind of just read through there a little bit. So let's go ahead and go up, and we're going to have to kind of do that with evidence anyway. So we'll kill two birds with one stone here. Okay, so we have subsequent research supports this model. Okay, Alexander Volkov and his colleagues at University of Alabama demonstrated this. To test the model, they rigged up very fine electrodes, applied electrical current to the open lobes of the trap. This made the trap close without any direct touch to its hairs. While they didn't measure calcium levels, the current likely led to increases. Okay, so this is an issue, right, with their experiment. Okay, they weren't able to measure the calcium levels. They're assuming that the current led to the increases. Okay, so in this case, that's what we're looking for as an answer choice then. Right, we know in this previous guy's model, he was ultimately applying, I believe, that electric charge as well, or he at least hypothesized that. Okay, so we want to touch on the fact that it's not actually measuring calcium levels. Okay, so if we go down, we have option B, Volkov's measurement did not corroborate a central element of Hodick and Siever's model. Yes, okay, the fact that it was supposed to, or at least it should have, if it could have, measured that calcium level. That's that central element that we're missing here. Okay, if we look at C and D, Volkov's direct application of an electrical current would have been objectionable to Hodick and Siever's. Okay, Hodick and Siever's, I believe that they're the ones who did it first. Let me just quick scroll up to verify that for you guys. But either way, whoever did it first was also using the electrical current. Okay, so that wouldn't make sense. Okay, then we see that that was Hodick and Siever's, right? So ultimately, they both used the electrical current, so that's going to be wrong right there with C for number 50. And then D, Volkov's technology was not available to Hodick and Siever's. Yeah, obviously, but that's not a potential criticism, okay? Then if we look at 51, we need something supporting this, okay, which should be what I highlighted up here. We'll see what lines those are, okay? What was between those parentheses, which ultimately explained that central element we're missing. So that's up to 74. It looks like from about 72. So I'm going to look for an answer choice that contains that. So 72 to 74. Okay, I see that we've got 71 to 74. Okay, so that would work perfect there. All right, going to number 52 now. Based on the passage, in studying the Venus flytrap, Volkov and his colleagues made the most extensive use of which type of evidence? Ultimately, this is just observation. When they end up putting these electric pulses through these plants, we have option A, mathematical models to predict the electrical charge. No, we know that we actually found it experimentally. B, analysis of data collected from previous researchers' work, including Venus flytrap's response to electricity. No, we know that they conducted their own research, not from previous researchers' work. C, information obtained from monitoring the Venus flytrap's response to varying amounts of electrical current. Yes. Okay, and then D, published theories of scientists who developed earlier models of the Venus flytrap. No. Okay, they did their own experiment here. They didn't use published theories. Hopefully this video is helpful. If it was, make sure to like and subscribe. In addition to that, if you're looking to donate or if you're looking for my website where I offer private SAT prep, college essay brainstorming, and college essay editing, then be sure to check out the links in the description.